He found her in the blizzard, half frozen and protecting her little brother with her own body. She was a stranger. Desperate and proud, he was a hermit, a man haunted by a past he could not escape. Living in a valley he hoped the world would forget. He offered her shelter, but the snowstorm wasn't the only danger they faced. To save her brother, she needed a home. To save himself, he needed a reason to live. So, trapped by the endless snow, he made her a proposal, not of love, but of survival. A marriage in name only, but on the frontier a vow is a powerful promise, and the heart has a way of rewriting the rules. Welcome to Frontier Rescue Stories. We are so glad you're here. Before we go any further into today's story, if you enjoy tales of courage, hope, and the families we forge in the wild, please help our channel grow. When you hit that like button, it tells YouTube that you value this story. And if you subscribe and ring the bell, you'll be the first to know when our next story is ready. We'd also love to know where in the world you're watching from today. Drop your city or country in the comments below. Your support helps us bring these stories to life for a larger audience. Now let's begin. Elias Thorne knew the signs. The air in his remote mountain valley had become perfectly unnaturally still, a dead, biting cold that promised violence. The sky, which had been a clear high blue that morning, was now a flat, bruised gray, pressing down on the peaks. He was a man who lived by these signs, a man who had learned to read the mountains the way other men read books. His life was a testament to efficiency and solitude. His small one-room log cabin, nestled in a grove of aspens that stood like white skeletons against the coming storm, was a fortress against the world. It was tidy, functional, and scrubbed clean of any personal comfort. There was a cot, a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table, and one, only one, wooden chair. It was the home of a man who expected no company and wanted none. He was a stoic, silent figure, weathered not just by the sun and wind, but by a grief so profound it had become a part of his features. His beard was thick, his eyes the color of the sky before the snow, and his past was a locked room. He was the only one with the key, and he had long since thrown it away. He spent the morning securing his small ranch. He moved with a grim, practiced rhythm, his actions precise and economical. He reinforced the shed door, where his lone cow and 2 mules huddled. He checked the chimney flue, ensuring the mud and log chimney wouldn't catch fire. He stacked a fortress of split firewood against his cabin's eastern wall, a solid buffer against the wind. He did not fear the storm. He simply accepted it. Storms were a part of life on the frontier, like breathing, or like the aching, cavernous silence left behind when his first family, when they were gone. This valley was his self-imposed exile, a place to wait out the rest of his days. He had chosen it because it was harsh, because it was unforgiving. He felt it suited him. The snow began as a gentle, almost lazy flurry, but by midday it was a white hell. The wind shrieked like a living, furious thing, a sound that seemed to come from the earth itself. It erased the world in a blur of white. Visibility dropped to 0. This was a killer wind, the kind that trapped a man in his own home, or buried him if he was foolish enough to be caught outside. Elias, inside his cabin, stoked the fire. The small room was his refuge, sturdy logs chinked with mud and moss. But the wind found every tiny crack, whistling a mournful, high-pitched tune. He settled in for a long wait, the silence inside as vast as the storm outside. It was on the second day of the blizzard that he heard it. A sound. A sound that should not have been there. It was a faint, desperate cry, almost stolen by the wind. He froze, listening. He thought it was a wolf, perhaps, or a coyote caught in the open. Or perhaps it was just his mind, finally cracking in the suffocating solitude. He had gone days, sometimes weeks, without hearing another human voice. But he heard it again. Higher-pitched, desperate, human. Elias was a man who preferred not to interfere. The world outside his valley was not his concern. But he was also, at his core, a man who understood the rules of the mountains. And the first unbreakable rule was this: you do not ignore a cry for help. Cursing his decision, cursing the person foolish enough to be out in this, he pulled on his heaviest buffalo hide coat, grabbed his rifle, and wrapped his face in wool. He tied a rope from his waist to the cabin's sturdy door handle, a lifeline in case he was blinded by the snow. He stepped out into the white chaos. The cold hit him like a physical blow. The wind tore the breath from his lungs. He followed the sound, walking backward against the wind, his lifeline rope paying out behind him. He found them less than a quarter-mile from his cabin, a broken-down, ramshackle wagon half buried in a drift. A single mule lay frozen in its harness, and beside it, a mound. He brushed the snow away, and his heart, which he thought had turned to stone years ago, lurched with a force that sickened him. It was a woman. She was young, perhaps 20, her face pale and blue with cold, her thin shawl frozen stiff as a board, and she was wrapped, like a human shield, around a small, trembling bundle. A boy, her name he would learn, was Clara Monroe. The boy was her brother Nathan. She was unconscious, or perhaps just past it, but her arms were locked so tightly around her brother that Elias had to break her frozen, rigid grip to free him. The boy, perhaps 8 years old, was awake but barely responsive, his small body racked with a deep, wheezing cough that sounded like tearing paper. Elias didn't hesitate. He was a man of action, not words. He slung the small, frighteningly light boy over one shoulder, lifted the woman into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, and he followed his rope line back to the cabin. He kicked the door open and stumbled inside, the wind howling in behind him before he slammed it shut, plunging the room back into the warm, fire-lit silence. He laid them both on his cot, the only soft place in the cabin. He worked quickly, his stoic nature turning to a grim, professional focus. He cut away their frozen, ruined outer clothes and wrapped them in his warmest wool blankets. He stoked the fire until the small cabin was almost unbearably hot. He found his stores of dried herbs, and using the snow he'd brought in, boiled water to make a willow bark tea for the fever he knew was coming. He forced warm broth, spoonful by spoonful, between the boy's chattering teeth. Clara awoke hours later. She gasped, her eyes flying open in terror. She saw the rough-hewn log walls, the stone fireplace, and the large, bearded stranger looming over her in the firelight. She tried to scramble back, her voice a raw, broken croak. Where am I?
Who are you?
Elias stepped back, his shadow huge on the wall, holding his hands up to show they were empty. You're safe, my cabin.
I found you in the storm.
Clara's eyes darted around the small room and then widened in a new, sharper panic. She didn't ask about herself. She didn't ask who he was. Her first words were a desperate, ragged plea. My brother. Nathan, where is my brother? What have you done with him? He's here. Elias pointed with his chin, his voice a low rumble. By the fire. He's breathing. Clara crawled from the cot, stumbling on weak, trembling legs. She collapsed by the bundle of blankets where Nathan lay. His face, no longer blue, was now flushed with a deep, dangerous red. His breathing was shallow and rasping. She put a hand to his forehead, and a sob of pure terror escaped her. He's burning up. Oh, heavens, he's burning! Elias watched them, his face an unreadable mask. The storm howled outside, a reminder of their shared prison. He had rescued them from the snow, but he knew, with a sinking, familiar certainty, that the blizzard was not the worst of their problems. The storm did not let up. For 3 more days, the wind and snow battered the small cabin, sealing the 3 of them inside. The world shrank to the 4 log walls of that one room. The space, which had been a sanctuary for Elias, now felt like a cage. The air was thick with tension. The smell of wood smoke, wet wool, and the sharp medicinal scent of the herbs Elias kept simmering over the fire. And underneath it all was the constant, harrowing sound of Nathan's ragged cough. Elias, a man used to a vast and silent world, was now confined to a few square feet with 2 strangers. He was a stoic, but even he felt the pressure. He gave Clara and Nathan the cot, sleeping on his bedroll by the door, a silent, watchful guardian. He was not just keeping the cold out. He was, he realized, keeping the world at bay for them. Clara, he quickly learned, was not a woman who accepted charity easily. She was possessed by a quiet, fierce pride. As soon as her strength returned, she was on her feet, refusing to be idle. She was desperate to prove she was not a burden. While Elias was outside in the brief lulls, tending to his animals in the shed, she took over the cabin. She swept the floor. She tidied his sparse belongings, her hands quick and sure. She found his meager rations of flour, salt pork, and dried beans, and with a skill that surprised him, she made a simple, hearty stew. She found his mending basket and, seeing the state of his clothes, she began to mend a tear in his coat. She did it all with a quiet, fierce efficiency that Elias, a man of action himself, found himself respecting. They spoke little. The cabin was too small for idle conversation, and their situations were too raw. But a silent routine was born. He would rise in the dark, his movements quiet, and stir the fire. By the time he came back from checking the livestock, she would have coffee, harsh and bitter, but hot, ready. He would bring in wood. She would have broth ready for the boy. He would sit in his one chair, staring at the fire. She would sit on the floor by the cot, her hand never leaving her brother's arm. On the fourth day, the wind died, but the silence that replaced it was heavy and absolute. Nathan's fever had not broken. His cough had grown weaker, a sound that terrified Clara more than the rattling. She sat by the cot, wiping his face with a damp rag, her own face pale and strained, her eyes wide and dark with exhaustion. "The fever's worse," she whispered, not to Elias, but to the room. "He needs a doctor. There must be a town." "A doctor?" Elias stopped stirring the fire. He looked at the window, now a solid, frosted-over wall of white. "The nearest town is Stone Creek. It's 2 days' ride in good weather. This is not good weather." He was not being cruel. He was being honest. It was the only way he knew how to be. "The passes will be blocked for a week. Maybe more." Clara's face crumpled. Her pride, the armor she had worn against the world, finally shattered. "A week? He doesn't have a week." Tears, hot and angry, streamed down her face. "We have nothing. Do you understand?" "Nothing." Elias, deeply uncomfortable with her raw emotion, turned back to the fire. "You have shelter. You have food. We have nothing," she repeated, her voice raw. "We're orphans. Our parents, they died of the fever back in Missouri. We had a cousin, or so we thought. He wrote us from Stone Creek, said there was work, a new start." She laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "We spent our last dollar on that wagon, on that mule. We sold our parents' farm to get here. We were coming to Stone Creek to start over." Her voice cracked. "And now." She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent, racking sobs. Elias sat in his single chair, staring at the flames. He was a man who solved problems. He solved them with his hands, with his rifle, with his axe. This was a problem he could not shoot or chop. He listened to her sobs and to the boy's shallow, wheezing breathing. He saw their situation with a stark, brutal frontier clarity. She was a woman alone. The boy was sick. When the snows cleared, they would be destitute. Stone Creek was a hard town, a mining camp full of rough men and few opportunities. A single woman with no money and a sick child. Her fate would be sealed, and then he looked at his own life. The silence, the emptiness, the years stretching out before him, each one as gray and cold as the storm outside. He was haunted by the ghosts of a family he had failed to protect. A wife Mary and a son Thomas, taken by a fever just like this 5 years ago, in this very cabin, because he couldn't get the doctor in time. He looked at the boy burning up on his cot. He looked at the woman, broken by despair. A solution formed in his mind. It was a terrible, practical, and, in its own way, perfect solution. It was a bargain, a way to save them, and perhaps a way to atone for his own past. He waited until her sobs quieted to small, hiccuping breaths. He stood up and added another log to the fire. He didn't look at her when he spoke, his voice flat and devoid of all emotion. "You need a home," he said. "The boy, he won't survive another trip. He needs medicine. He needs food. He needs a roof." Clara looked up, her eyes red and raw. I have no money to pay you. I have nothing to offer." "I'm not asking for money," Elias said. He finally turned to look at her. His gaze was steady, unblinking, as hard as the mountains outside. "You need a home. I have one. This ranch. It's too much for one man, and a man alone. People in town talk. It's not proper." Clara frowned, her exhausted mind struggling to follow. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Elias continued, his voice steady, "that you need a protector. And I need a wife. In name only." Clara recoiled as if he had struck her. Her jaw dropped. My wife?" "It's a bargain, Miss Monroe," he said, his stoic mask firmly in place. "A marriage of convenience. You and the boy would get my name. You would get this cabin. You would get food and protection. The boy would get the medicine he needs from Stone Creek as soon as the pass is clear. In return, I would have a partner, someone to run the house." It's a practical arrangement. Nothing more. He let the words hang in the air, cold and sharp. He was offering her the only thing he had, his name and his protection. He was offering her survival. Clara stared at him, her mind reeling. Marry this stranger, this silent, haunted mountain man. It was unthinkable. It was madness. Then she looked at Nathan, her little brother who had trusted her to get them to safety. He let out a tiny whimpering cough in his sleep. She realized, with a cold, sinking dread, that it was not unthinkable at all. It was the only thing. She looked from her dying brother to this hard, unyielding man. Her choice was no choice at all. Clara's answer, when it came, was as quiet as the snow falling outside. All right. Elias turned, surprised by the speed of her reply. But she wasn't finished. She stood up, pulling her dignity around her like a threadbare shawl. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but they were no longer pleading. They were a match for his own. I accept your bargain, Mr. Thorne, but understand this. She took a steadying breath, her small frame rigid. I will be your partner, as you said, not your servant. I will not be a burden. I will earn my keep and my brother's. Is that understood? Elias looked at this wisp of a woman, who had survived a blizzard and was now negotiating the terms of her life from a position of absolute desperation. A flicker of something, respect, passed through his cold eyes. He gave a single curt nod. I expect nothing less. The storm broke 2 days later. The world was transformed, buried under a pristine, blinding white that hurt the eyes. The ride to Stone Creek was brutal. Elias rode his strongest horse with Clara, wrapped in his spare coat, sitting behind him. He carried Nathan, bundled in every blanket they owned, cradled in his arms. The boy was so light, so frail. Elias could feel the child's shallow, fevered breaths against his chest. It was a feeling he thought he would never experience again, and it twisted something painful inside him. When they arrived in Stone Creek, it was little more than a muddy, half-frozen street carved into a gulch, lined with false-fronted buildings and saloons. They drew stairs. Miners wrapped in rags stopped to watch them. The whispers followed them as Elias led the horse straight to the office of the Justice of the Peace. The ceremony was the coldest, most businesslike affair imaginable. It took less than 5 minutes. The justice, a man named Peters, looked bored and smelled of whiskey. 2 miners, pulled in off the street as witnesses, looked amused, their eyes lingering on Clara. Elias stood tall and silent, his face unreadable. Clara stood beside him, her face pale, her eyes fixed on a crack in the floor. They said "I do" in flat, emotionless voices. Elias paid the fee in coins, and just like that, Clara Monroe was now Mrs. Thorne. The name felt foreign and heavy on her tongue. Their first stop as a married couple was the doctor's office. The doctor, a weary-looking man, confirmed Nathan had pneumonia. He gave Elias medicine and a long list of instructions. Their second stop was the general store. Elias, in his silent way, bought supplies. He didn't just buy flour, beans, and bacon. He bought a new, thick wool blanket. He bought a small tin of hard candy. And he bought a new, sturdy pair of women's boots, whose own were falling apart. He didn't ask her size. He had just noticed. He placed the items on the counter, paid, and handed the bundle to her without a word. The ride back to the cabin was even quieter than the ride in. But the silence was different. It was heavier. It was the silence of 2 people bound by a vow they never wanted, a vow that changed everything. That night, the awkwardness in the one-room cabin was so thick it was almost suffocating. This was their wedding night. They were husband and wife, but they were strangers, trapped by a piece of paper and a sick child. Clara's heart hammered in her chest. She put Nathan to bed on the cot, his new medicine finally making him sleep deeply, his breathing already seeming a fraction easier. She turned her back to the room, not knowing what to do. What did he expect? She heard Elias move. She tensed, her shoulders nodding, but he wasn't coming toward her. He was at the hearth. He unrolled his bedroll and, without a word, laid it on the cold, hard floor by the door. He checked his rifle, then sat with his back against the wall, a silent sentinel. He was seating the cot, the only bed, to her and her brother. It was a simple action, but it spoke volumes. It was an act of respect. He was a guard at her door, not a husband in her bed. Clara let out a breath she didn't know she was holding, and so their new life began. It was a life of shared silence, a partnership built on unspoken rules. They were two planets in a very small orbit, learning to move around each other without colliding. A new routine formed. He would rise before dawn. The sound of him stirring the fire would be her alarm. She would get up and make coffee and oatmeal. They would eat at the small table, the silence broken only by the scrape of spoons on bowls. Then their work would begin. Elias was teaching her the ranch. He was patient in his own rough way. He showed her how to milk their one cow, how to churn butter, how to mend a fence line, how to clean and oil his rifle. He showed her how to check his trap lines. Clara in turn transformed the cabin. She was a creator. She scrubbed the floors until they were pale wood. She found his mending basket and repaired all his clothes. She organized his pantry. Soon the cabin began to smell of baking bread and drying herbs. Elias just watched. This small, determined woman was bringing life into his empty fortress. She was filling the silence, and he found, to his shock, that he didn't mind. He started to notice little things. The way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. The fierce, protective way she smiled when Nathan, who was slowly getting stronger, would laugh. Their new normal was tested one night. A pack of wolves, made bold by the long winter, descended on the chicken coop. Elias was awakened by the panicked cackle of the hens. He grabbed his rifle and burst out the door. Clara was right behind him, not with a scream, but with the heavy fireplace poker in her hand. Her face set. A large gray wolf lunged from the shadows, not at Elias, but at Clara. Elias raised his rifle, but he was too slow. Clara didn't run. She didn't cower. She roared, a sound of pure protective fury, and swung the poker with all her might, striking the wolf across the muzzle. The animal yelped and fell back, just as Elias's rifle cracked, the sound echoing through the valley. They stood in the snow, panting, their breath pluming in the cold air. The other wolves scattered. Elias looked at Clara. Her eyes were wide, not with fear, but with adrenaline. She was trembling, but she was standing. She had not hidden. She had fought. He reached out and took the poker from her, his fingers brushing hers. The touch was electric, a near-miss moment that crackled in the cold. "You're A," he started, but he couldn't find the words. "You should go inside. You're cold." He had meant to say brave. He had meant to say strong. But he was a man who had forgotten how to use such words. Clara just nodded, but as she went back inside, she knew. This bargain, this cold arrangement, was no longer simple. As the snows of the long, hard winter finally began to melt, so too did the ice around Elias Thorne's heart. Spring came to the valley with a sudden desperate beauty. The creek, once frozen, now roared with life. The aspens budded, their leaves a shade of green so bright it almost hurt the eyes. The valley floor, brown and dead for months, was carpeted in wildflowers. The change in the season mirrored the change in the cabin. The thaw was both external and internal. With the spring, Nathan's health returned. The ticking clock that had forced their bargain was gone. The boy, once pale and frail, was now a whirlwind of energy. He had grown to adore the silent, powerful man who had saved him. He followed Elias everywhere, helping with the chores, chattering endlessly to a man who never spoke. And Elias, to Clara's astonishment, seemed to endure it. He never smiled, but she saw him on one occasion whittling a small wooden bird for the boy. When Nathan asked him to fly it, Elias, with a gruff sigh, got on one knee and made the bird fly for the child. The reason for their marriage was gone. This new reality created a new unspoken tension. They were no longer bound by necessity. They were three people, living as a family, bound only by a piece of paper they both privately regarded as a lie. So why were they still here? Clara, for her part, had begun to make the cabin a home. She was not just a partner in survival. She was an architect of life. She planted a small garden behind the cabin with seeds Elias had bought on his last trip to Stone Creek, seeds she hadn't even asked for. She hung curtains made from old bleached flour sacks, which softened the harsh light. She even brought wildflowers inside, placing them in a small tin jar on the table. She was, without realizing it, nesting. Elias watched all this with a strange, quiet turmoil. His fortress of solitude, his monument to grief, was being invaded by color, by life, by the smell of hope. This woman and her brother were rescuing him from a grief he had nursed for years, and it terrified him. To be happy felt like a betrayal. To care for this new family felt like forgetting the old one. The turning point came one evening. The air was soft and cool. The three of them were sitting on the cabin's small porch, watching the sunset, painting the peaks in shades of purple and orange. Nathan, who was carving a piece of wood with the small, dull knife Elias had given him, suddenly looked up. "Elias?" the boy asked, in the simple, direct way of a child. "Where is your family?" The silence that followed was instant and absolute. The chirping of the crickets seemed to stop. Clara gasped and immediately moved to scold him. "Nathan, that is not—" "We don't ask. It's—" "All right, Clara." Elias's voice was quiet, rougher than usual. He stared out at the mountains, his knuckles white as he gripped the porch rail. For a long time, he said nothing. Clara and Nathan sat in silence, frozen. Just when Clara thought he would get up and retreat back into his shell, he spoke. "I had a family before this." His voice was low and he didn't look at them. He was speaking to the valley, to the ghosts. "My wife, Mary, and my son, Thomas. He was 7. He told them the story, the one that haunted his every waking moment. A fever, just like Nathan's. It had swept through the valley 5 years earlier. He had been a younger man then, full of hope, full of plans. I went for the doctor." The creek. It was flooded from the spring melt. A flash flood. I couldn't get across. I tried for 2 days. I almost drowned, but I kept trying. His voice broke, a small, almost imperceptible crack. By the time I got back, it was too late. They were quiet. I was too late. He finally turned to them, his eyes filled with a pain so deep, so raw that Clara had to look away. I failed them. I wasn't fast enough. I wasn't strong enough. This valley, it took them. This was his secret. This was the truth of his stoicism. It was not a lack of feeling. It was a surplus of it. It was guilt and shame and a grief so profound it had frozen him in time. Clara didn't move. She didn't offer him pity or platitudes. She understood. She too knew what it was to be terrified of failure. After a long shared silence, she spoke, her voice just as quiet. "I was so afraid," she whispered, sharing her vulnerability, her own secret. "The night you found us, I had given up. I had laid down in the snow to wait. I thought I had failed him. I thought I had failed Nathan. When I closed my eyes, I was letting go." She looked at him, and her eyes were clear. "You didn't just rescue us from the storm, Elias. You rescued me from that." The bargain was gone. In its place was a bond forged in shared loss and a new fragile hope. The emotional rescue was complete. The tension now was different. It was no longer awkward. It was charged. Days later, Elias was teaching her to properly stack wood for the coming winter. "You have to cross-hatch it," he was explaining, his voice practical. "Or the center will rot." Her hand was in the wrong place. "No, like this." He reached out, his large, calloused hand covering hers to guide it. They both froze. It was the brush of a finger, the hug that lasts too long. It was a simple accidental touch that felt more intimate than a kiss. The charged silence crackled between them. He looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the strength in her eyes, the flush on her cheeks. She looked up at him, and she did not pull away. He leaned in. She leaned in. The almost kiss, a promise of a new vow, a real one. "Elias." "Clara, look!" Nathan's voice shattered the moment. He was holding up a frog. "I found one." Elias and Clara sprang apart, their hearts hammering. The moment was broken, but the truth was out. The pining, the constant thoughts, which was mutual. The bargain was a distant memory. This was something real. The summer settled over the valley, warm and green. The days were long, and the work was hard. But the tension from that almost kiss remained. The unspoken truth hung in the small cabin, making the one-room space feel charged with a new, profound awkwardness. It was no longer the silence of strangers. It was the silence of two people who had stumbled to the edge of a cliff, looked down, and then stepped back, terrified of the fall. They were bound by a fake vow, but their feelings were dangerously real. Elias, the stoic, retreated. After revealing his deepest wound, his instinct was to build his walls higher. He threw himself into his work, staying out on the range later, checking fence lines that didn't need checking. He was a man at war with himself. He had failed one family. He was terrified he would fail this one too. To love them was to risk losing them. Clara, proud and resilient, gave him his space. She too was afraid. She had built a home here, a life for her brother. She would not risk it for a feeling. no matter how powerful. The final test came in late July. A small wagon train heading for Oregon passed through the valley. It was a rare event. They stopped at Elias's cabin to water their horses and trade for fresh milk and eggs. They were a vision of the outside world, a reminder that life existed beyond their small, isolated patch of land. Clara stood on the porch talking to one of the women, a kind-faced woman named Mrs. Hemlock. "It's a new life out there," the woman said, smiling. "A new beginning for all of us." Clara, holding a small basket of eggs, smiled back. "It sounds hopeful." Elias watched her from the barn. He saw her face, the longing in her eyes. He saw her looking at the wagons, at the families, at the promise of a future. And his heart, which had just begun to thaw, froze over again. He thought, "She's going to leave. I'm failing again." He was trapping her here, just as the valley had trapped him. That night, after the wagon train had moved on, the silence in the cabin was a heavy, suffocating blanket. Nathan was asleep. Clara was mending a shirt by the last of the light. Elias sat at the table, oiling a piece of tack, his hands moving with a precise, angry energy. Finally, he put the leather down. He had to perform his final act of redemption. He had to give her the choice he had never given his first wife. He had to set her free. "Clara," he said, his voice quiet. She looked up, her needle pausing. The bargain we made," he began, his voice rough. "The winter is over. The boy is well. The agreement, it's complete." He took a deep, ragged breath. "You are a free woman. You saw those wagons. You should be free to go, to find a new life, a real one." Clara stared at him, her heart stopping. Was he dismissing her? "After everything, I've been to Stone Creek," he continued, plowing ahead, unable to stop, his eyes fixed on the table. I spoke to the justice. I had your name added to the deed. Half this ranch, this cabin, it's yours. You can sell your half, or you can stay. You are free. The choice is yours." He had done it. He had given her everything, her freedom and his land. He had not begged her to stay. His pride, his stoic nature wouldn't allow it. He had given her the ultimate act of respect, her choice. He expected her to say thank you, to talk of Oregon. He waited for the blow. Clara put the mending down. She stood up. She walked over to him, and he finally looked up at her. His eyes were full of that same old pain, the pain of a man expecting to be left. She didn't cry. She didn't yell. She simply smiled, a small, slow smile that reached her eyes. "You're right, Elias," she said softly. "The bargain is over." He flinched. She reached out and placed her hand on top of his rough, calloused one on the table. "This," she said, her voice full of a warmth he had never heard, "isn't a bargain anymore. This is my home. You are my home." Elias's world stopped. He looked at her hand on his, then up at her face. He saw no pity. He saw no obligation. He saw love. He turned his hand over and laced his fingers with hers. His grip was tight, a silent promise, an action, not a word. The final scene is the three of them, weeks later, on the porch. Elias is in his chair. Nathan is leaning against his leg, reading from a book. Clara is sitting on the top step, leaning her head back against Elias's knee. He has one hand on her shoulder. They are not talking. They are just being. A family. He had proposed without love, just to give a boy a home. But on that small patch of land, in a cabin built for survival, they found something more. They had rescued each other from the storms of the world and the storms within. They had found a family, and they were, at last, all of them, home. And that's where our story ends. In the quiet valley they came to call home. Thank you for spending your time with us here at Frontier Rescue Stories. If this story of hope and second chances touched your heart, please let us know by hitting the like button. It truly does help. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell so you won't miss our next tale. We have a whole playlist of stories just like this one, filled with courage, redemption, and the unbreakable human spirit. Click on the playlist on your screen to continue the journey. But most importantly, we want to hear from you. What did you think of Clara and Elias's journey? And what kind of stories would you like to see us tell next? Your suggestions and your feedback mean the world to us. From all of us here, we wish you a wonderful day, and we'll see you in the next story.